In the hills of central Nigeria, where the air was thick with the smell of fresh earth and the sounds of chirping birds, lay a small village named Orochi. The village was tucked between large stretches of lush farmland and winding riverbeds. The people of Orochi were simple folk, living off the land and holding fast to traditions passed down from generation to generation. Among these villagers was a man named Chijioke Okafor. A man of average height with weathered hands, a broad chest, and dark eyes, Chijioke was known by all. His reputation was both respected and feared. He was the head of his household and the eldest son in his family, a man who valued honor, tradition, and discipline above all else. Though he wasn't a cruel man by nature, Chijioke harbored a temper that had caused many to give him a wide berth. Chijioke's temper was like the storms that would sometimes roll across the land, seemingly calm at first, but capable of unleashing a destructive force when provoked. He had a wife, Ngozi, who had borne him one child, a daughter named Adama. Adama was the apple of her father's eye, his only daughter, and he loved her deeply, at least, in his own way. He never expressed affection openly, but it was understood in the family that Chijioke's love was a quiet, protective love. Adama was a bright and spirited girl, growing into a young woman with dreams that stretched beyond the boundaries of their village life. She was often found by the river with her friends, her laughter ringing through the air, or helping the elders with their chores. Her spirit was free, much like the birds that flew across the vast skies, and she cherished her independence. But this independence came with a price, one that she had yet to fully understand. For while Chijioke adored his daughter, he believed that her role was to adhere to the traditions of the village. To him, a woman's place was to marry well, bear children, and serve the family. Anything that threatened these values was seen as an affront. As Adama grew older, so did the tension between her and her father. She had dreams of something more. She had heard stories from travelers and traders passing through Orochi about schools in other villages, about women who could read and write, about girls who could choose their husbands and have careers of their own. This idea had taken root in her heart, and the more she thought about it, the more she yearned for a different life. One day, a group of village girls returned from a nearby town where they had been learning at a new school. Their eyes sparkled with the excitement of knowledge, and they spoke of the world beyond Orochi with such enthusiasm that Adama could hardly contain her excitement. "Father," she said one evening, nervously tugging at her dress as she approached him, "there is a school in the neighboring village. They teach girls like me to read and write. I want to go there, father. I want to learn about the world." Chijioke's expression darkened as he heard the words. He looked at his daughter as though she had just uttered the most blasphemous thing he had ever heard. "What nonsense is this?" he barked, his voice low but filled with authority. "A woman's place is not in school. You will stay here, help your mother, and prepare for the future I have planned for you. You will marry a good man and build a home." Adama stood there, trembling with a mixture of fear and frustration. This wasn't the first time she had asked her father for something outside of the narrow life he had designed for her, but this time felt different. She wasn't going to back down. "I don't want to marry a man I don't know, father," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I don't want to live in this village forever. There's more to life than this. Why can't you see that?" Chijioke's face turned red. His nostrils flared as he clenched his fists. How dare his daughter question him like this? How dare she challenge the life he had given her? "You will not speak to me like this," he shouted, his voice booming across the room. His body trembled with the force of his anger. "I have sacrificed everything for this family, and this is how you repay me? With disobedience." Adama took a step back, her heart racing. She had never seen her father so furious. His anger was usually cold and calculating, but now it was raw, burning. She didn't know how to respond. In that moment, a deep and terrible fear settled into her chest. Before she could say another word, Chijioke grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward him. His grip was like iron, and Adama winced in pain as he dragged her through the house. She struggled to free herself, but his strength was too much. "You will stay here and learn your place," he bellowed, shaking her violently. "I will not allow you to bring shame to this family with your foolishness." Adama's mind spun. What had happened to the father who once doted on her? What had become of the man who promised to protect her from the world? The pain in her arm was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. She was not just physically hurt, she was betrayed. With a sharp shove, Chijioke sent his daughter stumbling across the room. She fell hard onto the floor, the air knocked out of her lungs. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You will go to your room and stay there," Chijioke ordered, his voice now cold and unforgiving. For the next few days, the house was filled with an eerie silence. Adama stayed locked in her room, not daring to leave. Her father never spoke to her, never acknowledged her presence. He went about his daily chores as if nothing had happened, while her mother, Ngozi, was quiet, unsure of what to say or do. Adama's thoughts were a storm inside her. Her father's wrath had shaken her to the core, but it had also awakened something inside her, a need to escape, to break free from the suffocating grip of her father's control. She could no longer accept the life that had been laid out for her. Her dreams of a future beyond the village burned brighter than ever, but the fear of her father's anger kept her locked in place. Yet, in that fear, a small flame of defiance grew. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between father and daughter became unbearable. Chijioke's anger still simmered beneath the surface, but Adama's resolve only grew stronger. She began to gather the courage to leave, to follow the path her heart so desperately yearned for. One evening, as Chijioke was preparing to leave for the fields, Adama stood before him. She had made up her mind. "I'm leaving, father," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. Chijioke froze. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "I'm leaving. I'm going to the school. I'll make my own way in the world," she said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it before. "I will not live under your control any longer." For a long moment, Chijioke said nothing. His face was unreadable, but inside, the storm that had been brewing for years finally broke. He stepped toward her, and in an instant, he slapped her hard across the face. The force of the blow sent her to the ground, tears streaming down her face. "You are nothing without me," he roared, his voice breaking with fury. "I will not let you ruin our family with your nonsense." Adama lay on the floor, her face burning with the sting of the slap. But beneath the pain, there was a quiet strength. She stood up slowly, wiping the blood from her lip. "I will leave," she said, her voice unwavering. "And you can never stop me." As she turned to leave the house, Chijioke stood frozen, torn between the love for his daughter and the grip of tradition. He watched her disappear into the night, knowing that things would never be the same. Adama walked away from her father's house, each step echoing louder in her chest than the last. The night air was cool against her skin, but inside, a fire burned. She had never imagined it would come to this, the confrontation, the slap, the decision to leave everything behind. Yet, as she crossed the threshold of their homestead, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of freedom. She had no destination in mind. The village was vast, and the world beyond it seemed like an infinite expanse. Her heart raced with both fear and anticipation, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Adama felt alive, truly alive. But that feeling didn't last long. As she made her way toward the river, her mind churned with doubt. Where would she go? How would she survive? And what about her mother? The thought of Ngozi sitting in that house, torn between her daughter and her husband, made her stomach twist in knots. She didn't want to leave her mother behind. But she knew that she could not stay. She had to pursue her own future, even if it meant doing so alone. Chijioke stood by the door long after Adama had left, his hands trembling with fury and regret. He had always been a man who controlled his emotions, but in that moment, the storm inside him threatened to tear him apart. His daughter, the child he had protected, had left him. Gone. Without a trace. He had struck her, he had slapped her in front of the entire family, and now she was gone. His heart felt heavy, as though it had been ripped from his chest. His mind raced with thoughts of what could have been. Was he right to punish her so harshly? Did he love her so much that he could not bear to see her choose her own path? Chijioke had always believed that discipline and tradition were the cornerstones of a stable life. He had forced Adama to follow these rules, believing he was doing what was best for her. But now, as the weight of his actions settled on his shoulders, he wondered if he had been wrong. "What have I done?" he muttered to himself, his voice low and regretful. "What have I done to my own daughter?" Inside the house, Ngozi sat by the fire, her head buried in her hands. She had heard the argument, seen the fury in Chijioke's eyes, and witnessed the slap. Her heart ached for her daughter, for the pain she had endured. But she had been powerless to stop it. Ngozi had always been caught between her love for her husband and her love for her daughter. She had known that Adama was growing restless, questioning the life she had been given, but Ngozi had hoped, prayed, that it would pass. She had hoped that her daughter would find peace in the simplicity of village life, just as she had. But now, she feared Adama was lost to her. What will become of her? Ngozi whispered to herself, staring at the flickering flames. Will she ever come back? Will she ever forgive us? The silence in the house was suffocating, the heavy weight of guilt pressing down on Ngozi's chest. She had always known that Chijioke's anger could be dangerous, but she had never imagined it would push their daughter to leave. Now, the fear of losing Adama forever seemed more real than ever. Adama's feet were sore from the long walk, but she did not stop. The village was far behind her now, and the world ahead was an open road, one she had never known but was eager to explore. She walked through the thick jungle, past the fields, and over the hills that led to the neighboring villages. The moonlight bathed the earth in a soft, ethereal glow, and she felt a strange sense of peace, though it was tempered by the uncertainty of her future. As she journeyed deeper into the wilderness, she met an old woman along the path. The woman was bent with age, her skin wrinkled like dried leather, her eyes sharp despite the years. She carried a large basket of yams on her head, and when she saw Adama walking alone, she paused, her gaze curious. "Where are you headed, child?" the woman asked, her voice soft but commanding. Adama hesitated. She had no plan, no real destination. But something about the woman's presence felt comforting, like a safe harbor in a storm. "I don't know yet," Adama replied. "I just had to leave my home." The woman studied her for a moment, then nodded knowingly. "You are running from something, child, but remember this. No matter where you go, you will carry your past with you. It is not the path ahead that will define you, but how you carry yourself through the challenges you face." Adama looked at the old woman, unsure of how to respond. But the words had a profound effect on her, settling deep in her heart. She had already crossed the point of no return. Now, all that mattered was how she would move forward. The old woman smiled kindly and gave Adama a handful of dried herbs. "Take these for your journey, child. They will protect you from hunger and the harshness of the road. But remember, no one is truly free until they free themselves from their own mind." Adama nodded, grateful, and thanked the woman before continuing on her way. Days turned into weeks, and Chijioke could no longer ignore the emptiness that had settled into his soul. He had tried to fill the void with work, with conversations with the elders, but nothing seemed to bring him comfort. The pain of his daughter's departure gnawed at him relentlessly. He had heard nothing from her, and the longer she was gone, the more he feared that he might never see her again. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the girl who had run away, and Chijioke could feel their eyes on him every time he passed by. They had begun to whisper that he had driven his own daughter away with his harshness. One evening, as Chijioke sat alone by the fire, he found himself unable to hold back the tears. "Adama, where are you? What have I done?" he whispered into the night. The guilt was unbearable. He had been a man of pride, a man who believed that discipline was love, that control was care. But now, as he sat in the emptiness of his home, he realized how deeply he had failed his daughter. He had pushed her away in the name of tradition, in the name of what he thought was right. But he was wrong. The days blurred into each other for Adama as she made her way through the unfamiliar lands. She had crossed rivers, walked through dense forests, and stayed in small villages where people looked at her with a mix of curiosity and pity. They saw a young girl alone, a girl who had fled from her family, and some offered her food, shelter, or work in exchange for labor. Though life on the road was difficult, Adama felt stronger with each passing day. She worked hard to earn her keep, finding odd jobs wherever she went, harvesting crops, tending to animals, helping women with household chores. She was learning to navigate the world on her own, no longer the protected daughter of Chijioke Okafor, but a young woman carving her own path. But with each new village, Adama's thoughts kept drifting back to her father. She had left him in anger, but now, as time passed, she began to wonder if she would ever find it within herself to forgive him. Would Chijioke come looking for her? Did he even care? It was a question she didn't have the answer to. But one thing she knew for certain, she would never be the same again. The girl who had left Orochi was no more. The woman who walked this new path would be defined not by her father's expectations, but by her own choices. As months passed, Adama's life on the road became both a challenge and a teacher. She had learned to adapt, becoming more resourceful with each passing day. The experiences that had once felt like unbearable obstacles had slowly turned into the foundations of her strength. She could no longer see herself as the frightened girl who had fled from her father's house. She was a woman now, independent, resilient, and determined to create a life on her own terms. Yet, no matter how far she traveled, she could not escape the memories of her father. The images of Chijioke's angry face, the harshness of his words, and the sting of his slap haunted her at night. There were times when she longed for the comfort of her mother's presence, for the warmth of the familiar, but those moments were fleeting. Her heart, now scarred and hardened by the events of the past, could not return to the life she had once known. It wasn't long before word reached her that Chijioke had begun searching for her. He had traveled from village to village, speaking to traders, elders, and travelers, asking if they had seen his daughter. His search was relentless. The once proud man had become a shadow of himself, broken, humbled by his guilt and the absence of his daughter. When Adama first heard the news, a part of her felt a pang of regret. She had been angry when she left, but now, the thought that her father might be suffering was too much for her to ignore. She had wanted to escape his control, but the love she had for him, the love she had always felt, still lingered in her heart. "What will I do if I see him again?" she wondered aloud, as she sat by a campfire one night. The thought of confronting him stirred a storm inside her. She had always been her father's daughter, and deep down, she still wanted his approval. But would he accept her now that she had left him? Would he understand why she had made the choice to leave? The answer came to her one evening when she encountered an old traveler who told her about a village where Chijioke was last seen asking for her. The news hit her like a tidal wave. She knew it was time to face him, to confront the past and the man who had shaped so much of her life. The day arrived, and Adama found herself standing at the edge of the village where Chijioke was said to be. Her heart raced as she approached the familiar path leading to her home. The same path she had walked so many times before, now it felt like a distant memory, a life she had left behind. She could hear the sounds of the village in the distance, children laughing, vendors calling out, and the rhythmic pulse of life continuing as it always had. But for Adama, this moment was anything but ordinary. It was a reckoning, a test of everything she had learned over the past months. As she entered the village, she spotted a familiar figure standing near the well. It was him, Chijioke Okafor, the man who had once been everything to her. He was different now. His once proud stance was now slumped with fatigue, his clothes were weathered, and his face was lined with the marks of regret. Chijioke saw her approach, and for a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. Then, slowly, he took a step toward her. His eyes were filled with a mix of hope and sorrow. "Adama," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "Is it really you?" Adama stood still, staring at him. The anger she had felt when she left had faded, but so had the love. Instead, there was something deeper, something that neither love nor hate could define. She had come to understand that her relationship with her father was not something she could return to as it had been. There had been too much pain, too many wounds. But there was also something else. There was the understanding that no matter how far she had run, Chijioke was still a part of her. "Yes, it's me," Adama replied softly. "I've come to speak to you." The silence between them grew, thick with the weight of years and words unsaid. Chijioke took another step closer, but Adama held up her hand. "You slapped me, father. You hurt me in ways that still haunt me." Her voice was calm but firm, as if speaking those words had lifted a heavy burden. "You made me feel like I wasn't worth anything unless I followed your rules. But I had to leave to understand that I am worth something on my own." Chijioke's face twisted with pain. He stepped back as though her words had struck him physically. He had never wanted to hurt her, he had never meant to break her spirit. But in trying to control her, to protect her, he had done the very thing he had sworn never to do. "I was wrong, Adama," Chijioke said, his voice breaking. "I was wrong to treat you that way. I thought I was doing what was best for you, but I see now that I was only holding you back. I should have listened to you." Tears welled up in Adama's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She had cried enough. What she needed now was clarity, not pity. Not from her father, nor from herself. "I've learned to live without you," she said, her voice steady. I've learned to live for myself. I can't go back to the way things were. I've changed. And I hope you can understand that." Chijioke bowed his head, ashamed. "I understand. I see now that I should have given you the space to grow, to become the woman you are. I was selfish, Adama. And I am sorry." Adama took a deep breath, her heart torn between the girl she had once been and the woman she had become. She knew that forgiveness would not come easily. It couldn't. There was too much hurt, too much history. But she could no longer carry the weight of resentment. It would only continue to bind her to a past that no longer defined her. "I forgive you, father," Adama said quietly, her voice full of resolve. "But I cannot return to the life I had. I need to keep moving forward. I need to build my own future." There was a long pause. Chijioke didn't know what to say. He had lost his daughter once, and now he had to accept that he might never get her back. But he could not deny the truth of her words. She had become the person she was meant to be, not because of him, but in spite of him. "I understand," Chijioke said finally, his voice hoarse. "I will not ask you to come back. I only ask that you remember that I love you. Always." Adama nodded, her heart heavy but at peace. She had said the words she needed to say. And now, for the first time in her life, she was free. Adama turned and began walking away from her father, her steps lighter than they had ever been. She had faced him, confronted her past, and come to terms with the person she had become. As she walked into the distance, leaving her father behind, Adama knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But it would be hers to walk. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she was certain of one thing: she had reclaimed her life. And that was all she needed.